Captain Jake Morrison had seen many terrible things during his 15 years as a deep space salvage operator, but nothing prepared him for what he discovered in the abandoned research station orbiting the dead world of Kepler 442c. The station had been dark for 3 months according to galactic records, officially listed as a mining survey operation run by the Zephyrian Consortium. Jake's ship, the Mercy's Hand, had picked up the distress beacon 2 days ago. Standard protocol dictated he report it to the nearest galactic authority outpost, but something about the weak, irregular signal pattern bothered him. It wasn't following any recognized emergency broadcast format. Instead, it seemed almost desperate, personal. The docking bay of the research station was filled with expensive equipment, all bearing the logos of various alien corporations. Jake recognized most of them, legitimate businesses that wouldn't normally be involved in anything questionable. Yet his instincts, honed by years of finding trouble in the darkest corners of space, were screaming warnings. Jake moved through the station's corridors with his plasma rifle ready. The artificial gravity was still functioning, but life support was running on emergency power. Most of the rooms he checked were standard laboratory setups: biological research, genetic analysis equipment, sample storage units. Everything looked normal on the surface, but there were too many security doors, too many restricted access panels. It was the sound that led him to her. A soft whimper echoing through the ventilation system, so quiet he almost missed it. Following the sound, Jake found himself in a section of the station that wasn't on any of the floor plans he'd downloaded. The corridors here were different, reinforced, with multiple lock mechanisms on every door. The source of the sound was behind a heavy security door marked only with a number: Subject 7. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized what kind of facility this really was. The lock was electronic, but the power fluctuations had caused it to default to an unlocked state. Inside the small room, huddled in the corner, was a being unlike any Jake had ever seen. She appeared feminine in build, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim emergency lighting. Her hair was silver white, falling past her shoulders, and her large eyes were a striking violet color. She was humanoid in basic structure, but clearly not human. Her proportions were more delicate, her fingers longer, her ears slightly pointed. She was also clearly terrified. When Jake entered the room, she pressed herself further into the corner, her violet eyes wide with fear. She wore only a thin medical gown, and Jake could see strange marks on her arms that looked like injection sites. There were monitoring devices attached to her, cables running to machines that were beeping softly in the darkness. "Hey," Jake said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Jake. I'm here to help." The being looked at him with confusion, tilting her head as if trying to understand his words. She spoke then, her voice musical but filled with pain and fear. The language was completely foreign to Jake, but the universal translator on his wrist began working immediately. "Please, no more tests today. I cannot. I am too tired." Jake's heart clenched. Whatever had been happening here, it was clear this being had been suffering for a long time. He knelt down slowly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her further. "There won't be any more tests," he said gently. "The people who were doing this are gone. I'm going to get you out of here." She stared at him for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his face. There was something in her expression, hope maybe, mixed with disbelief. She had been hurt so badly that kindness seemed impossible to believe. You are not one of them?" she whispered. "No," Jake said firmly. "I'm human. My species doesn't do things like this. We're going to get you somewhere safe." The being tried to stand but collapsed immediately, her legs too weak to support her. Jake moved forward instinctively to help, but she flinched away from his touch. The fear in her eyes made Jake's anger burn hotter. What had these monsters done to her? "I'm sorry," he said, pulling back. "I know you're scared, but we need to get off this station. There might be others coming back." As if summoned by his words, Jake's wrist communicator chirped with an incoming transmission. His ship's AI, Aria, spoke with urgent tones. "Captain, I'm detecting 3 vessels approaching the station. They'll be here in approximately 40 minutes. Energy signatures match Zephyrian military craft." Jake cursed under his breath. The consortium was coming back, probably to clean up their mess and eliminate any evidence. He looked at the frightened being in the corner and made a decision that would change both. Their lives forever. We're leaving. Now. He stood up and began disconnecting the monitoring equipment from her arms as gently as possible. Can you tell me your name? She looked at him with those haunting violet eyes and spoke a word that sounded like music. Lyrelai. Lyrelai, Jake repeated, trying to pronounce it correctly. That's beautiful. I'm going to carry you to my ship, okay? I know you don't trust me yet, but those people who hurt you are coming back. I won't let them have you again. Something in his voice seemed to reach her. Lyrelai nodded slightly and didn't pull away when Jake carefully lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her frame delicate and weakened by whatever had been done to her. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Jake's mind was already working on their next steps, getting her medical attention, finding her people, making sure she was safe. These were his priorities. But he also knew that what he'd discovered here was bigger than just one victim. This was evidence of something dark and terrible happening in the galaxy's shadows. The Mercy's hand was waiting in the docking bay, her engines already warming up. As Jake carried Lyrelai aboard his ship, he looked back at the research station one last time. Whatever secrets it held, whatever horrors had been committed here, he would make sure the galaxy knew the truth. But first, he had a life to save. 3 days into their journey, Jake brought the Mercy's hand into dock at Freeport Station, an independent trading hub located in neutral space between the major galactic powers. The station was a sprawling collection of interconnected modules, home to merchants, refugees, and others who preferred to stay outside the reach of the major governments. If anywhere in the galaxy would be safe for them, this was it. Lyrelai had improved dramatically during their journey. The combination of proper nutrition, rest, and freedom from constant fear had begun to restore her strength. She was able to walk short distances now, though she still tired easily. More importantly, she had begun to trust Jake, asking questions about human culture and sharing fragments of her own people's history. The Kithera, she had told him, speaking the name of her species with pride. We are explorers and healers. Our ships travel the galaxy seeking new knowledge and offering aid to those who need it. We have never sought conflict with anyone, which made their targeting by the consortium even more heinous in Jake's opinion. As they docked, Jake made sure Lyrelai was wearing one of his spare jackets and a hat to help conceal her alien features, not because he was ashamed of her, but because the consortium had resources and informants everywhere. The fewer people who saw her, the better their chances of staying hidden. Stay close to me, Jake told her as they entered the station's main hub. Freeport is generally safe, but there are always opportunists looking for easy prey. Lyrelai nodded, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. The bustling crowds and noise of the station seemed to overwhelm her after years of isolation. But she pressed on bravely beside Jake. Their destination was a small bar called The Last Port, run by an old friend of Jake's, named Marcus Chen. Marcus was a former military intelligence officer who had left service after becoming disgusted with the corruption he'd witnessed. Now he ran information networks for those operating outside official channels. The bar was dimly lit and filled with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries that called Freeport home. Marcus himself was behind the bar, a tall, lean man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When he saw Jake enter with a hooded companion, he raised an eyebrow but said nothing until they were seated in a private booth. Jake Morrison, Marcus said, sliding into the booth across from them. Haven't seen you in 6 months. Word is you've been stirring up trouble with the Zephyrian Consortium. Word travels fast, Jake replied grimly. Marcus, I need your help. What I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything. Jake looked at Lyrelai, who nodded nervously and pulled back her hood. Marcus's eyes widened as he took in her distinctly non-human features, then narrowed as he noticed the marks on her arms and the fearful way she held herself. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. What did they do to her? 2 years of medical experimentation, Jake said, his voice tight with controlled anger. She's Kithera, her people are explorers and healers. The consortium attacked their colony ship and kidnapped 12 of them for research purposes. She's the only survivor. Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying Lyrelai's face. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Lyrelai, is it? Can you tell me about the facility where they held you? Lyrelai glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. In halting words, she described the research station. the procedures they had performed, the other captives who had died during the experiments. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The genetic manipulation research, Marcus said when she finished. They were trying to create some kind of hybrid, weren't they? Lyrelai's face went pale and she nodded reluctantly. They said my people's regenerative abilities combined with other species' traits could create the perfect soldiers, beings who could heal from any wound, adapt to any environment. Monsters, Marcus said flatly. They were trying to create super soldiers using forced breeding programs. He looked at Jake. Do you have any proof? Documentation, recordings, anything? Jake activated his datapad and showed Marcus the medical scans he'd taken of Lyrelai, along with the security footage from the research station that Arya had managed to download before they escaped. Marcus reviewed the information carefully, his expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. Finally, he looked up. This is bigger than just the consortium, he said. The genetic markers in these scans. I've seen similar research before in classified military reports. There are rumors that several major powers are involved in illegal bioweapons research. The consortium was probably just one arm of a much larger operation. Jake felt his heart sink. He had hoped that exposing the consortium would be enough. But if this corruption reached into the highest levels of galactic government, what can we do? He asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. There's someone you need to meet. Dr. Sarah Kim, she runs a clinic here on Freeport for refugees and trafficking victims. She's also been investigating these genetic research programs for years. If anyone can help Lyrelai recover and expose this conspiracy, it's her. Within an hour, they were in Dr. Kim's clinic, a surprisingly well-equipped medical facility hidden in one of Freeport's lower levels. Dr. Kim herself was a small, intense woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She took one look at Lyrelai and immediately began preparing a comprehensive medical examination. I've been treating victims of illegal research for 5 years, she told Jake while Lyrelai was being examined by her medical staff. But I've never seen anything this systematic. The genetic modifications they attempted. It's a miracle she survived. Will she recover? Jake asked. Physically, yes, with time and proper treatment. Psychologically? Dr. Kim shrugged. That depends on her. She's shown remarkable resilience so far. Having someone she trusts helping her is crucial. Dr. Kim's examination revealed the full extent of what had been done to Lyrelai. The consortium had not only conducted their breeding experiments, but had also implanted various monitoring devices and made surgical modifications to her body. Some could be removed, others would require months of careful treatment. The good news, Dr. Kim explained to both of them, is that most of the changes aren't permanent. Your people's natural healing abilities have been fighting the modifications all along. With the right treatment, we can reverse almost everything they did. Lyrelai cried when she heard this. The first tears of hope rather than pain that Jake had seen from her. He found himself fighting back emotions of his own as he watched this brave being finally allow herself to believe in a future beyond the nightmare she'd endured. But their moment of relief was interrupted when Marcus burst into the clinic with urgent news. We have a problem, he announced. I've been monitoring consortium communications. They've issued a galaxy-wide bounty for Jake and Lyrelai. 50 million credits, dead or alive. Jake felt Lyrelai grip his arm, her newly found hope wavering. But instead of despair, Jake felt something else. Determination. Let them come, he said firmly. We have evidence of their crimes now. We have allies, and we have the truth on our side. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. I have contacts in the Galactic Authority who aren't corrupted. People who've been waiting for solid evidence to move against these research programs. With Lyrelai's testimony and the documentation you recovered, we can bring them down, Marcus finished. All of them. Lyrelai looked around at the 3 humans who had committed themselves to helping her, and for the first time since her capture, she smiled. My people have a saying, she told them. The strongest trees are those that bend with the storm but never break. I was bent almost to breaking, but I did not break. And now with your help I will stand tall again. Jake squeezed her hand gently. We'll all stand tall, and when we're done, no one will ever have to suffer what you went through again. The war against the consortium was about to begin, and humanity had chosen its side. 3 days into their journey, Jake brought the Mercy's hand into dock at Freeport Station. an independent trading hub located in neutral space between the major galactic powers. The station was a sprawling collection of interconnected modules, home to merchants, refugees, and others who preferred to stay outside the reach of the major governments. If anywhere in the galaxy would be safe for them, this was it. Lyra Ley had improved dramatically during their journey. The combination of proper nutrition, rest, and freedom from constant fear had begun to restore her strength. She was able to walk short distances now, though she still tired easily. More importantly, she had begun to trust Jake, asking questions about human culture and sharing fragments of her own people's history. The Cathara, she had told him, speaking the name of her species with pride. We are explorers and healers. Our ships travel the galaxy seeking new knowledge and offering aid to those who need it. We have never sought conflict with anyone, which made their targeting by the consortium even more heinous, in Jake's opinion. As they docked, Jake made sure Lyra Ley was wearing one of his spare jackets and a hat to help conceal her alien features. Not because he was ashamed of her, but because the consortium had resources and informants everywhere. The fewer people who saw her, the better their chances of staying hidden. Stay close to me, Jake told her as they entered the station's main hub. Freeport is generally safe, but there are always opportunists looking for easy prey. Lyra Ley nodded, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. The bustling crowds and noise of the station seemed to overwhelm her after years of isolation, but she pressed on bravely beside Jake. Their destination was a small bar called The Last Port, run by an old friend of Jake's named Marcus Chen. Marcus was a former military intelligence officer who had left service after becoming disgusted with the corruption he'd witnessed. Now, he ran information networks for those operating outside official channels. The bar was dimly lit and filled with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries that called Freeport home. Marcus himself was behind the bar, a tall, lean man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When he saw Jake enter, with a hooded companion, he raised an eyebrow but said nothing until they were seated in a private booth. Jake Morrison, Marcus said, sliding into the booth across from them. Haven't seen you in 6 months. Word is you've been stirring up trouble with the Zephyrian Consortium. Word travels fast, Jake replied grimly. Marcus, I need your help. What I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything. Jake looked at Lyra Ley, who nodded nervously and pulled back her hood. Marcus's eyes widened as he took in her distinctly non-human features, then narrowed as he noticed the marks on her arms and the fearful way she held herself. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. What did they do to her? 2 years of medical experimentation, Jake said, his voice tight with controlled anger. She's Cathara. Her people are explorers and healers. The consortium attacked their colony ship and kidnapped 12 of them for research purposes. She's the only survivor. Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying Lyra Ley's face. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Lyra Ley, is it? Can you tell me about the facility where they held you? Lyra Ley glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. In halting words, she described the research station, the procedures they had performed, the other captives who had died during the experiments. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The genetic manipulation research, Marcus said when she finished. They were trying to create some kind of hybrid, weren't they? Lyra Ley's face went pale and she nodded reluctantly. They said my people's regenerative abilities combined with other species' traits could create the perfect soldiers. Beings who could heal from any wound, adapt to any environment. Monsters, Marcus said flatly. They were trying to create super soldiers using forced breeding programs. He looked at Jake. Do you have any proof? Documentation, recordings, anything? Jake activated his data pad and showed Marcus the medical scans he'd taken of Lyra Ley, along with the security footage from the research station that Area had managed to download before they escaped. Marcus reviewed the information carefully, his expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. Finally, he looked up. This is bigger than just the consortium, he said. The genetic markers in these scans. I've seen similar research before, in classified military reports. There are rumors that several major powers are involved in illegal bioweapons research. The consortium was probably just one arm of a much larger operation. Jake felt his heart sink. He had hoped that exposing the consortium would be enough. But if this corruption reached into the highest levels of galactic government, what can we do? He asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. There's someone you need to meet. Dr. Sarah Kim. She runs a clinic here on Freeport for refugees and trafficking victims. She's also been investigating these genetic research programs for years. If anyone can help Lyra Lee recover and expose this conspiracy, it's her. Within an hour, they were in Dr. Kim's clinic, a surprisingly well-equipped medical facility hidden in one of Freeport's lower levels. Dr. Kim herself was a small, intense woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She took one look at Lyra Lee and immediately began preparing a comprehensive medical examination. I've been treating victims of illegal research for 5 years, she told Jake while Lyra Lee was being examined by her medical staff. But I've never seen anything this systematic. The genetic modifications they attempted. It's a miracle she survived. Will she recover? Jake asked. Physically, yes, with time and proper treatment. Psychologically? Dr. Kim shrugged. That depends on her. She's shown remarkable resilience so far. Having someone she trusts helping her is crucial. Dr. Kim's examination revealed the full extent of what had been done to Lyra Lee. The consortium had not only conducted their breeding experiments, but had also implanted various monitoring devices and made surgical modifications to her body. Some could be removed, others would require months of careful treatment. The good news, Dr. Kim explained to both of them, is that most of the changes aren't permanent. Your people's natural healing abilities have been fighting the modifications all along. With the right treatment, we can reverse almost everything they did. Lyra Lee cried when she heard this, the first tears of hope rather than pain that Jake had seen from her. He found himself fighting back emotions of his own as he watched this, brave being finally allow herself to believe in a future beyond the nightmare she'd endured. But their moment of relief was interrupted when Marcus burst into the clinic with urgent news. We have a problem, he announced. I've been monitoring consortium communications. They've issued a galaxy-wide bounty for Jake and Lyra Lee. 50 million credits, dead or alive. Jake felt Lyra Lee grip his arm, her newly found hope wavering. But instead of despair, Jake felt something else. Determination. Let them come, he said firmly. We have evidence of their crimes now. We have allies. And we have the truth on our side. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. I have contacts in the Galactic Authority who aren't corrupted. People who've been waiting for solid evidence to move against these research programs, with Lyra Lee's testimony and the documentation you recovered. We can bring them down, Marcus finished. All of them. Lyra Lee looked around at the 3 humans who had committed themselves to helping her, and for the first time since her capture, she smiled. My people have a saying, she told them. The strongest trees are those that bend with the storm but never break. I was bent almost to breaking, but I did not break. And now with your help I will stand tall again. Jake squeezed her hand gently. We'll all stand tall. And when we're done, no one will ever have to suffer what you went through again. Danny Gior. War against the consortium was about to begin and humanity had chosen its side. 2 weeks later, Lyra Lee was strong enough to walk without assistance and had gained back much of the weight she'd lost during her captivity. More importantly, her spirit was returning. She had begun helping Dr. Kim in the clinic, using her people's natural healing abilities to assist other refugees who had suffered trauma. It was, she told Jake, helping her remember who she was before the consortium tried to break her. Jake had spent those same 2 weeks working with Marcus to build their case against the conspiracy. What they discovered was worse than any of them had imagined. The illegal research programs weren't limited to just genetic experimentation. They included mind control studies, biological weapons development, and something called Project Genesis that seemed to involve creating an entire slave race of modified beings. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to data displayed on his computer screen. They were in his secure office above the bar, surrounded by the technological equipment that made his information network possible. I've tracked financial records through 6 different shell companies. The funding for these programs comes from military contracts across 4 major galactic powers. Jake studied the information, feeling sick. They're all in on it. The Terran Federation, the Zephyrian Empire, the Altarian Republic, even the Centauri Alliance. Our own government is funding this, which explains why nobody's been able to stop it, Dr. Kim added from her position at another terminal. Every time someone gets close to exposing the truth, the evidence disappears or the investigators have accidents. Lyra Lee looked up from the refugee files she'd been reviewing. Over the past week, she'd identified 3 other beings among Dr. Kim's patients who showed signs of having been subjected to similar experiments. None were Kithara, but all had been kidnapped from peaceful species and subjected to genetic modification attempts. There's something else, Lyra Lee said quietly. These other victims, they all come from species known for specific abilities. Enhanced strength, telepathic communication, natural camouflage abilities. The experimenters weren't just trying to create soldiers, they were trying to create beings with every possible advantage. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. A master race. They're trying to create the perfect beings to serve as slaves or weapons. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. And if they succeed, they'll have no need for the original species. Why keep free Kithara alive when you can manufacture obedient ones in a laboratory? The implications hit all of them at once. This wasn't just about individual crimes, it was potential genocide on a galactic scale. Their planning session was interrupted by an urgent alert from the station's security system. Marcus quickly pulled up the surveillance feeds, and they all watched as armed figures in consortium uniforms began moving through Freeport's docking bays. They found us, Jake said grimly, reaching for his weapon. No, Marcus corrected, studying the feeds more carefully. They're not here for you specifically. Look at the search pattern. They're checking every ship, questioning every station resident. This is a general sweep. Dr. Kim was already moving toward a concealed panel in the wall. Emergency protocols, she explained, revealing a hidden passage. I've prepared for this possibility. There's a safe room connected to the old maintenance tunnels. We can reach my ship from there without being seen. As they gathered their evidence files and prepared to evacuate, Lyra Lee stopped suddenly. The other victims, she said urgently. The ones in your clinic. We can't leave them. Dr. Kim shook her head. They're safe for now. The consortium doesn't know about them, and my staff has orders to hide them if anyone comes asking questions. No, Lyra Lee said firmly, and for the first time since Jake had met her. There was no trace of fear in her voice, only determination. I spent 2 years watching others die while I could do nothing to help them. I will not run away and leave potential victims behind again. Jake looked at her, seeing the strength that had kept her alive through her ordeal now focused on protecting others. What are you suggesting? We get them out. All of them. And we take them somewhere the consortium can never find them. Marcus pulled up station schematics on his portable device. It's possible, but risky. My contacts in station security can create a distraction in the main docking area, draw the consortium forces away from the clinic level. But we'd only have about 20 minutes before they realize what's happening. Dr. Kim was already checking her patient list. 7 individuals total, including 3 who are still recovering from surgery. It won't be easy to move them quickly. Jake made the decision without hesitation. We do it. We don't leave anyone behind. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Jake's life. While Marcus's security contacts staged a fake emergency in the station's power grid, creating chaos in the main levels, Jake and his team quietly evacuated the clinic's most vulnerable patients. Dr. Kim had prepared portable medical equipment and emergency medications, while Lyra used her natural healing abilities to stabilize those who were too weak to travel safely. The most difficult moment came when they encountered a consortium patrol in one of the maintenance tunnels. Jake was leading the group carrying a young Altarian whose wings had been surgically removed by the experimenters, when 3 armed soldiers rounded a corner ahead of them. Halt, the lead soldier commanded, raising his weapon. You're in violation of station lockdown protocols. Jake saw the soldier's eyes widen as he recognized both Jake and Lyra from their wanted posters. The man was reaching for his communicator when Lyra stepped forward. Please, she said quietly, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality that Jake had never heard before. You don't want to hurt us. We're just trying to help these injured people reach medical care. The soldiers paused, their expressions becoming confused. Jake realized that Lyra was using some kind of psychic influence. an ability the consortium had probably been trying to exploit and enhance. You didn't see us, Lyreley continued in that same compelling tone. You checked this tunnel and found nothing. Continue your patrol in the opposite direction. To Jake's amazement, the soldiers nodded and turned away, walking back the way they had come as if nothing had happened. How did you do that? Jake whispered as they continued toward the hidden ship. Lyreley looked exhausted by the effort. Natural ability of my people. We can project calming thoughts, influence emotional states. The consortium tried to weaponize it, make it stronger, more controlling. I refused to use it as they wanted, but sometimes... She gestured toward the rescued patients they were protecting. Sometimes it's necessary to help others. They reached Dr. Kim's ship without further incident. It was a modified medical transport, designed to look like an ordinary cargo vessel but equipped with a full surgical suite and patient care facilities. As they loaded the rescued beings aboard, Jake marveled at how prepared Dr. Kim had been for exactly this kind of emergency. Where are we going? He asked as the ship lifted off from Freeport's hidden launch bay. Dr. Kim smiled for the first time since he'd met her. Sanctuary. There's a place the consortium doesn't know about. A hidden colony where others like us have been gathering evidence and protecting victims. It's time you met the real resistance. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Jake looked back at Lyreley, who was tending to one of the other rescued beings with gentle hands and soft words of comfort. In rescuing her, he had thought he was saving one life. Instead, he had found himself part of something much larger, a growing movement of beings from across the galaxy who refused to accept the horrors being committed in the name of scientific progress. The consortium thinks they're creating the future, Lyreley said as if reading his thoughts. But they don't understand that the future isn't built by enslaving others. It's built by freeing them. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of purpose unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin in earnest, and now they had the allies and evidence they needed to fight it. More importantly, they had something the consortium lacked: the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to be victims, and the determination of those who would risk everything to protect the innocent. The rescue had become a rebellion, and the rebellion was about to become a revolution. The hidden colony of Haven was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Built inside a massive asteroid in an uncharted system, it housed nearly 10,000 beings from dozens of different species, all refugees, victims or fighters in the war against the genetic experimentation programs. The colony's existence was protected by advanced stealth technology and the collective determination of its inhabitants to remain free. As their ship docked in Haven's concealed landing bay, Jake was amazed by the diversity of the beings working around them. He saw species he recognized and many he didn't, all working together with a common purpose. What struck him most was that many showed signs of having been modified by the experimentation programs: missing limbs, surgical scars, or other evidence of genetic tampering. Yet they had all somehow escaped and found their way here. Their welcoming committee was led by a tall, imposing figure that Jake initially mistook for a robot. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a mechanic, a species known for their natural ability to interface with technology. This individual, however, had clearly been extensively modified, with visible cybernetic enhancements covering much of his body. I am Unit 327, the being said in a synthesized voice. Though I prefer the name Victor, I speak for the Colony Council. Dr. Kim, it is good to see you return safely, and you must be Captain Morrison and Lyreley. Lyreley stepped forward, her violet eyes studying Victor with interest rather than fear. You were taken by them too, weren't you? Victor nodded slowly. The Altarian Republic captured me 3 years ago. They tried to force my species' technological integration abilities to create cybernetic super soldiers. When the process proved incompatible with my natural biology, they attempted to dispose of me. I escaped, but not unchanged. I'm sorry, Lyreley said softly. Do not be, Victor replied, and somehow his artificial voice conveyed warmth. They sought to make me a weapon. Instead, they created someone uniquely qualified to help others escape their fate. My modifications allow me to hack their security systems, disable their tracking devices, and coordinate rescue operations across the galaxy. Dr. Kim gestured for them to follow as Victor led them deeper into the colony. The passages were carved from solid rock, but lined with growing plants and soft lighting that created a surprisingly welcoming atmosphere. They passed residential areas, workshops, medical facilities, and what appeared to be schools where young beings of various species learned together. Haven isn't just a hiding place, Dr. Kim explained as they walked. It's a complete society. We've rescued over 2,000 victims of the experimentation programs in the past 5 years. Many choose to stay and help with rescue operations. Others eventually return to their home worlds to warn their people and gather support. They arrived at a large chamber that served as the colony's command center. The walls were covered with screens displaying information from across the galaxy, shipping routes, research facility locations, government communications, and most importantly, a constantly updated list of known victims and rescue operations in progress. At the center of the room stood a being that made Jake's breath catch. She was clearly human, but unlike any human he'd ever seen. Her skin had a slight metallic sheen. Her eyes were an impossible shade of silver, and when she moved, there was a fluid grace that suggested significant physical modifications. "Captain Morrison," she said, turning to face them with a smile that was both beautiful and somehow sad. "I'm Commander Elena Vasquez, formerly of the Terran Federation Navy. Welcome to Haven." Jake studied her face, noting the signs of extensive genetic modification. "What did they do to you?" Elena's smile turned bitter. "The Federation's super soldier program. They took volunteers from the military, promising enhanced abilities to better serve humanity. What they didn't mention was that the process involved incorporating genetic material from other species. I have Kythera healing abilities, Altarian enhanced reflexes, and Zephyrian strength augmentation." "That's incredible," Jake said, then immediately regretted his choice of words as Elena's expression darkened. "No, Captain, it's an abomination. They didn't enhance me. They made me into something that's no longer entirely human. And when the side effects started appearing, when volunteers began dying or going insane, they classified the program and tried to eliminate everyone involved." Lyrelei stepped forward, her hand extended toward Elena. "May I?" Elena looked puzzled but nodded. When Lyrelei placed her palm against Elena's forehead, her eyes widened in surprise. "Your genetic pattern," Lyrelei said softly. "It's not stable. The different modifications are fighting each other, causing constant pain." "Is that right?" Elena stared at her in amazement. "How did you—" "Yes, every day. The medical staff here helps, but they said there was nothing that could be done." "There is," Lyrelei said firmly. "My people's healing abilities aren't just physical. We can help stabilize genetic inconsistencies. It won't undo what was done to you, but it will stop the conflict between the different modifications." As Lyrelei began working with Elena, Victor updated Jake on their current situation. The Resistance had identified 47 active research facilities across the galaxy, with an estimated 3,000 victims currently being held. More disturbing was evidence that the various galactic powers were preparing to move to the next phase of their program. "Project Genesis," Victor explained, displaying classified documents on the central screen. "They believe they've perfected the modification process. The plan is to begin mass production of modified beings for military use within 6 months. Jake felt sick as he read the details. The project called for the systematic capture and modification of entire populations from species deemed to have useful traits. It was genocide disguised as military advancement. "What can we do?" Jake asked. "This is too big for rescue operations alone." Elena, looking remarkably better after Lyrelei's healing work, rejoined the conversation. "We've been building a coalition. Representatives from 12 species whose people have been targeted are meeting here next week to plan a coordinated response. But we need proof that will stand up in galactic courts, evidence so overwhelming that even the corrupted officials can't ignore it." "The research station where I found Lyrelei," Jake said. "The consortium abandoned it when we escaped, but all their data might still be there." Victor's cybernetic enhancements whirred as he processed this information. "Interesting. My sources indicate the facility is still abandoned. The consortium has been too busy covering their tracks to return for cleanup. If we could retrieve their complete research data, it would be the smoking gun we need," Elena finished. "But it's heavily defended. They may have abandoned it, but they've left automated security systems and probably have ships monitoring the area." Jake looked around the room at the assembled beings, victims who had become fighters, refugees who had become a resistance. Then he looked at Lyrelei, who had gone from a broken victim to someone strong enough to heal others and stand up to her captors. "Then we go back," he said simply. "All of us. We retrieve that data and we use it to expose the entire conspiracy." Lyrelei nodded, her violet eyes blazing with determination. "My people believe that truth is the most powerful weapon in the universe. It's time we used it." Elena smiled, and for the first time since Jake had met her, it was a smile of genuine hope rather than bitter resignation. "Then we're going to war. A war for the freedom of every sentient being in the galaxy." As the command center erupted in activity around them, with beings from dozens of species beginning to plan what might be the most important military operation in galactic history, Jake realized that his simple salvage mission had become something far greater. He had helped spark a revolution that would determine the future of civilization itself. The rescue of one being had grown into the liberation of thousands, and now it was time to ensure that no one would ever again suffer what Lyrelei had endured. The darkness that had hidden in the shadows of galactic civilization was about to be dragged into the light, and Jake intended to make sure it burned in that light until nothing remained but justice. The war for the soul of the galaxy was about to begin, and humanity would stand with all free beings against those who would make slaves of them all. The assault fleet that departed Haven a week later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 50 ships crewed by beings from 20 different species, all united in their determination to expose the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. Jake commanded the Mercy's Hand, now equipped with military-grade shields and weapons provided by the Resistance. Lyrelei stood beside him on the bridge, her violet eyes fixed on the viewing screen that showed their destination. The research station orbiting Kepler 442c looked exactly as they had left it 3 weeks earlier, dark and seemingly abandoned. But Victor's enhanced sensors detected the truth. Automated defense systems were still active, and 3 cloaked consortium ships lurked in the system's outer asteroid belt, waiting to respond to any intrusion. "It's a trap," Elena's voice crackled over the communication system from her ship. "The Liberation. They want us to come after the evidence." "Of course it's a trap," Jake replied, adjusting his ship's course toward the station. "But we're going anyway. Victor, are you ready to disable their security systems?" The mechanic's synthesized voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "I have been preparing for this moment for 3 years, Captain. Their systems will fall." The first phase of the assault went better than anyone had hoped. Victor's cybernetic abilities allowed him to hack into the station's automated defenses from long range, turning the defense platforms against the hidden consortium ships. The element of surprise was complete within minutes. 2 of the enemy vessels were destroyed and the third was fleeing toward hyperspace. But as Jake's team docked with the research station, they discovered that the consortium had left them one final surprise. The station's central computer core was rigged with a quantum cascade bomb. If triggered, it would destroy not just the evidence but everything within a light-year radius. 30 minutes, Victor announced after examining the bomb's circuitry. "That's how long I need to disarm it safely. But if the consortium has remote access to their systems, they could trigger it at any time," Jake finished. "Then we work fast." The next 25 minutes were a desperate race against time. Jake led one team to the secure data vaults while Lyrelei accompanied Dr. Kim to the laboratory levels, where the actual experiments had been conducted. Elena coordinated the evacuation of rescued prisoners from other parts of the station. They had found 17 more victims, beings who had been left behind when the facility was abandoned. In the data vault, Jake discovered evidence that exceeded even their worst fears. The research logs detailed not just the genetic modification programs, but plans for the systematic enslavement of entire species. The consortium and their government backers weren't just trying to create super soldiers. They were planning to replace natural evolution with controlled breeding programs that would produce beings designed for specific purposes. Soldiers, laborers, pleasure slaves, even living computers made from modified sentient minds. Meanwhile, Lyrelei was making discoveries of her own in the laboratory levels. She had found the cells where her fellow Kithara had been held, and the medical records of what had been done to them. But she had also found something else. A hidden laboratory where the consortium had been attempting to recreate her people's healing abilities in other species. "Jake," her voice came over the communicator, filled with both anger and determination. "You need to see this. They weren't just trying to steal our abilities, they were trying to create artificial Kithara. Beings with our healing powers but without our free will. Jake joined her in the hidden laboratory, where rows of stasis pods held partially developed beings that were clearly artificial constructs rather than natural life. The sight made him physically ill. They looked like Liralai's people, but their brainwave patterns showed no higher consciousness, only basic biological functions. "They're alive but not alive," Liralai whispered, her hand pressed against one of the pods. "They have bodies like mine, but no souls, no thoughts, no dreams." The consortium was going to use them as living medical tools. Before Jake could respond, Victor's urgent voice filled the station's communication system. "All teams, we have a problem. Long-range sensors show a consortium battle fleet jumping into the system. 50 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. They'll be here in 8 minutes." Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Looking at the artificial beings in their pods, beings that had never had a chance to live but were technically alive, he knew they couldn't save them all. "Liralai, can you end their suffering peacefully?" She understood immediately. These constructs would never be truly alive, and if they fell back into consortium hands, they would be used as tools of oppression. With tears streaming down her face, Liralai placed her hands on each pod and used her healing abilities in reverse, allowing the artificial beings to die quietly and without pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered to each one. "You deserve to live free, and I cannot give you that. But I can give you peace." The evacuation from the research station was chaotic but successful. As the Resistance fleet escaped into hyperspace with their precious evidence, the station behind them erupted in a brilliant explosion, as Victor's disarming of the bomb was interrupted by the consortium's remote trigger. The cascade reaction destroyed the facility completely, along with any remaining evidence of what had happened there. But they had what they needed. The data cores contained detailed records of the experiments, financial records linking the research to government funding, and most importantly, recorded testimony from hundreds of victims describing what had been done to them. Back aboard Haven, the Resistance leaders gathered to review their evidence. The quantum storage devices contained petabytes of data, detailing crimes against sentient life on a scale that dwarfed any previous atrocity in galactic history. "This is it," Elena said, her silver eyes blazing with fierce satisfaction. "This is enough to bring down governments, destroy careers, and end this nightmare forever." Dr. Kim was already preparing medical evidence packages that would document the physical and psychological trauma inflicted on the victims. The Galactic Health Organization will have to act on this. Even their most corrupted officials won't be able to ignore evidence this comprehensive. Victor was compiling the financial records that showed exactly which officials and which governments had authorized and funded the programs. "Justice will be served, but we must be careful. The moment we release this information, every victim and witness will become a target." Jake looked at Liralai, who was studying the faces of the victims in the testimony recordings. Many were of her own people, the Kithara who had died in the experiments. Her expression was calm, but he could see the fire burning in her violet eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked her. "I'm thinking that my people believe in truth as the ultimate justice," she replied. "We have the truth now, all of it. And truth, once released, cannot be contained or destroyed." Elena nodded. "Tomorrow, we transmit this evidence to every major news organization, every government official not implicated in the conspiracy, every rights organization in the galaxy. We flood the communication networks with so much evidence that it becomes impossible to suppress. And then?" Jake asked. "Then we watch the galaxy change," Liralai said quietly. "Some will try to deny it, others will try to cover it up. But most will see the truth for what it is. Proof that we are all connected, all deserving of freedom, all responsible for protecting each other from those who would make us slaves." As the leaders of the Resistance prepared for what might be the most important data transmission in galactic history, Jake reflected on how far they had all come. A simple salvage mission had grown into a revolution, and that revolution was about to reshape the moral foundation of galactic civilization. The evidence they had gathered would bring justice for Liralai and all the other victims, but more than that, it would ensure that future generations would grow up in a galaxy where such atrocities were not just illegal, but unthinkable. The final battle was about to begin, but this time it would be fought with truth instead of weapons, with evidence instead of violence, and with the combined moral authority of every free being in the galaxy standing together against tyranny. The galactic communication networks lit up at precisely 12 Kuroge Universal Standard Time. Simultaneously, on 10,000 worlds across the galaxy, the evidence packages began broadcasting on every available channel. News organizations, government offices, military commands, academic institutions, and private citizens all received the same massive data transmission containing the complete records of the genetic experimentation conspiracy. Jake stood in Haven's command center, watching as the galaxy reacted to the truth. Within the first hour, emergency sessions were being called in the parliaments of every major power. Military commanders were discovering that their own governments had been funding atrocities. Scientists were learning that their research grants had been diverted to support illegal programs. Citizens everywhere were seeing, for the first time, the faces and voices of the victims who had suffered in secret. Lyralay was being interviewed live by holographic reporters from 30 different news organizations. She spoke calmly and clearly about what had been done to her, about the friends she had lost, and about the artificial beings created to replace her people. Her violet eyes never wavered as she looked directly into the cameras and said the words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. I am Lyralay of the Kithara. I survived 2 years of torture and experimentation not through hatred or desire for revenge, but through the knowledge that truth is more powerful than any weapon ever created. Today, that truth sets all of us free. The first government to fall was the Altarian Republic. Within 6 hours of the evidence release, their military staged a coup against the officials who had authorized the research programs. The new leadership immediately issued a galaxy-wide apology and began releasing all political prisoners who had opposed the genetic modification projects. The Zephyrian Empire tried a different approach, claiming that the evidence was fabricated and that the research stations were actually rebel terrorist facilities. But their denial crumbled when 3 high-ranking military officers came forward with additional evidence, including personal recordings of orders they had received to capture subjects for experimentation. The Terran Federation's response was the most complex. President Sarah Chen herself addressed the human parliament, admitting that rogue elements within the military had participated in the conspiracy without civilian oversight. She immediately ordered the arrest of everyone involved and established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate the full extent of human participation in the programs. But it was the response from ordinary citizens across the galaxy that truly mattered. On hundreds of worlds, beings of all species gathered in massive demonstrations demanding justice for the victims and protection for survivors. The demonstrations were peaceful but absolutely enormous. On Earth alone, over 50 million humans gathered in cities around the world to show their support for the resistance and their outrage at their government's involvement. Dr. Kim found herself appointed as the head of a new Galactic Victim Recovery Organization, with unlimited funding and authority to provide medical and psychological care to everyone who had suffered under the experimentation programs. Her first official act was to establish treatment centers on 50 worlds, all staffed by volunteers from the resistance who understood trauma from personal experience. Elena was offered her old rank back in the Terran Federation Navy, along with command of a new task force dedicated to hunting down the remaining research facilities. She accepted on the condition that her fleet would include ships and crews from all species, making it truly galactic force for justice rather than a human military. Operation Victor became the coordinator of a new intelligence-sharing network that allowed law enforcement agencies across the galaxy to track down everyone involved in the conspiracy. His cybernetic abilities made him uniquely qualified to trace the complex financial and communication networks that had hidden the programs for so long. As for Jake, he was offered positions with a dozen different organizations, from military commands to civilian relief agencies. But after discussing it with Lyralay, he chose to continue doing what he did best, finding those who needed help in the darkest corners of space. The Mercy's Hand became the flagship of a new rescue organization dedicated to locating and freeing victims of trafficking and illegal experimentation. 6 months after the evidence release, Jake and Lyralay stood together on the observation deck of Haven, watching as the last group of rescued victims departed for their homeworlds. The hidden colony was being transformed from a secret refuge into an open rehabilitation center, no longer needing to hide from the authorities. "Do you think we won?" Lyralay asked, her hand resting gently in Jake's. Over the months of working together, their partnership had deepened into something more precious than either had expected to find. Jake considered the question carefully. We exposed the conspiracy, brought justice to most of the perpetrators, and rescued thousands of victims. But there will always be those who try to exploit others for power or profit. Lorelei nodded thoughtfully. My people have a saying, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We must always be ready to stand against those who would make slaves of others. Then we stay vigilant, Jake said firmly. Together. The final tally of the conspiracy's exposure was staggering. Over 400 research facilities were discovered and shut down across the galaxy. More than 5,000 victims were rescued and provided with rehabilitation services. Hundreds of government officials, military officers, and corporate executives were arrested and tried for crimes against sentient life. But perhaps most importantly, the exposure of the conspiracy led to the creation of new galactic laws protecting the rights of all sentient beings. The Universal Declaration of Genetic Integrity, signed by every major government and thousands of smaller ones, established that no being could be subjected to genetic modification without their informed consent, and that creating artificial sentient life for the purpose of slavery was a crime against the galaxy itself. Lorelei established a foundation dedicated to healing trauma victims using her people's natural abilities, training other Cathara in techniques for helping beings recover from the psychological wounds of captivity and experimentation. The Foundation also worked to locate and reunite families that had been separated during the research programs. 1 year after their first meeting on the abandoned research station, Jake and Lorelei were married in a ceremony that was broadcast across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species attended, celebrating not just their union, but the alliance between their peoples that had grown from their shared commitment to justice. The ceremony was held on Cathara Prime, Lorelei's homeworld, where Jake met the survivors of her people and learned about the culture that had produced someone with her incredible strength and compassion. The Cathara welcomed him not just as Lorelei's partner, but as a symbol of the cooperation between species that had made their victory possible. During the ceremony, Lorelei spoke words that would be quoted for generations to come. Love is not just between individuals, it is between species, between worlds, between all who choose to stand together against darkness. What began as one human saving one Cathara has become proof that when beings of goodwill unite, no force in the galaxy can stand against them. Years later, when historians studied the period that came to be known as the Great Liberation, they would identify Jake's decision to investigate that distress signal as the moment when the galactic community chose compassion over cruelty, justice over profit, and freedom over slavery. But for Jake and Lorelei, the true victory was much simpler. It was found in the children playing in Haven's gardens, offspring of beings from dozens of species, growing up together in freedom. It was in the former victims who had become counselors, helping others heal from similar trauma. It was in the knowledge that no one would ever again suffer alone in the darkness. Because the galaxy had learned to care for all its children, the rescue had become a revolution. The revolution had become a transformation, and the transformation had become the foundation for a better future. In the end, that was what justice truly meant, not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the innocent and hope for generations yet to come. And in the quiet moments between their missions, when Jake and Lorelei stood together watching the stars, they knew that their love had been the spark that ignited the conscience of the galaxy. What had begun against her will had become, through their shared courage and determination, the greatest act of freedom in galactic history.